Before we pivot away from this game, I want to talk about Washington State's quarterback, Jayden Delora. He was a true freshman. He was the freshman Pac-12 Player of the Week. I don't think he's Gardner Minshew. I don't think he's Anthony Gordon. Certainly he's in a very different offense without Mike Leach there. So we didn't see the gaudy numbers that you would expect. He only threw for 227 yards. Granted, they were up big, so they were running the ball a lot, like we discussed earlier. So we might see those numbers come up. But is he a guy that Washington State's put their last two quarterbacks in the NFL? Is he a guy that you think has some kind of legitimate potential here? Were you impressed by his performance? Was it chalking it up more to the Beavers not being ready for this game?
The main thing is that he didn't get in his own way. He didn't step on a rake. I think of Tua Tagovailoa. I mean, not that they're the same player. I'm thinking about Tua Tagovailoa with the Dolphins. Tua was more impressive against the Cardinals, but a week ago against the Rams, it was noticeable that Jared Goff was the guy who was making all the mistakes. And Tua committed one early fumble, but then played a clean game. Not a dominant game, but a clean game. And so that's kind of the parallel with Washington State's quarterback play against Oregon State. If the running game was working, just don't mess it up.
Right.
And sometimes, we were so insistent on big stats, Andy, that we don't give enough appreciation to just getting out of the way and letting things happen. And then that's what we saw. So that's very encouraging. It was a road game, night game. So that is a solid start for Washington State's offense. And I think that Nick Rolovich, he knows what he's doing. He did really well at Hawaii. And the thing to emphasize about Hawaii is that that's a program with a shoestring budget. And Rolovich took on that job and he made the best of it. Just in terms of X's and O's, his Nick Rolovich's politics and his media savvy leave a lot to be desired. In terms of COVID-19 and the off-season scrapes with players, which was pretty ugly for a period of time. So those are concerns and they shouldn't be dismissed. But just in terms of X's and O's, Rolovich is really sharp. And that is going to help Washington State's quarterback play. And, of course, in terms of a Pacific Northwest flavor and a Washington Husky flavor, it's going to be fascinating to see if Nick Rolovich can change the dynamic from Mike Leach, who was just who was Jimmy Lake's sheepdog, just completely owned especially in snow and inclement weather conditions. We'll see if Rolovich can change that dynamic in the Apple Cup. That's going to tell me something about where Washington State and its offense are headed.
Well, at least with Washington State, they have a coach who seems to have the X's and O's down really well, because the political issues and the COVID issues and the issues with players seem to be reminiscent of their previous coach. It doesn't seem like they have moved that far away from that spectrum there with Rolovich. I've heard a few of his interviews and press conferences and thought, wow, the media out there is kind of getting a lot of the same stuff that they were getting before, which is unfortunate for them. But if it leads to more wins, I'm sure the Cougar fans will be happy. All right, moving on. A couple of quick questions. I know the answers a lot of what you're going to say because we wrote articles at Trojans Wire discussing some of our predictions for the Pac-12, but I'm sure that listeners would love to hear your thoughts as somebody who has followed this conference very closely. Pac-12 Player of the Year for offense and defense. I'm curious just who you think. We know we've heard a lot about Slovis, obviously. For offense, Jayden Daniels looked really good. We got to see them head-to-head. It was a weird game, as we already discussed, but those two guys for Offensive Player of the Year, at least in my head, I'm curious if you have other contenders or what you thought about those two guys, having seen them head-to-head.
Yeah, so I think in terms of a Pac-12 Player of the Year, I think that the geography of the award shifted from south to north. So I think we went into the year thinking that Keaton Slovis or Jayden Daniels would be right up there. But I think after this game, neither one made an especially strong statement. And I think Daniels basically eliminated himself, given how short this season is. He doesn't have 10 games to compensate. Right. He only has 5. So it's going to be hard to recover from a difficult early season performance. So I think that I don't have a specific player in mind, but I just think that the geography of the award probably went north. I think an Oregon Duck, could be Tyler Shuck, could be CJ Verdell, are much more likely to be Pac-12 Player of the Year now after that very uneven USC-Arizona State game, a game in which the winning team was outplayed by the losing team. Right. So I think that the winner of the award is going to be from the North. I entered the year thinking it was going to be Slovis and that Daniels had a chance to upstage him, but the way that Arizona State USC game played out didn't work in favor of either man from the Pac-12 South. Yeah,
I have a feeling that your defensive player of the year is probably going to come from the same team you think that your offensive player is going to come from with the Oregon Ducks. But do you have thoughts on that award as well?
Yeah, so not a specific player, but Oregon's defense I think is going to be better than any other defense in the Pac-12. And here's the other thing: Cal not playing Washington. Chase Garbers gets hurt there on the offensive side of the ball, but also Cal's defense didn't get a chance to have what I expected to be a shutdown game against Washington's unknown offense. So that just even more puts Oregon in position to swipe both the offensive and defensive players of the year. I mean, Oregon has elite talent at all three layers of its defense: on the line, linebackers, secondary. Against Stanford, I don't know if we can say, one player was catapulted right to the head of the line, but there are plenty of players to choose from. So I do think that Oregon is really in position to now sweep the hardware in the Pac-12, given the struggles of USC and ASU, and given Cal not being able to play Washington with if a Cal can't play a second game, so that you have only 4 games for the Golden Bears, what's left? What is left on the table? I think it's going to be an all Oregon Pac-12 year.
Yeah, so that, you leaned into it a little bit, but I'm guessing that your prediction for the Pac-12 champion will likely be the Oregon Ducks. If it's them, or even if it's somebody else, if USC manages to pull off an upset in that game, or Arizona State somehow pulls it off, do you think that any team going undefeated in this abbreviated season for the Pac-12 has a chance at playing in the college football playoff at all? Or do you think that ship has sailed with already an abbreviated season, and of course 4 of the teams not playing in their first game?
Yeah, well, so I don't think the ship has sailed, but it's in the harbor and it's getting ready. It's just because we still have half a season left, and maybe some crazy happen. And I think one of those, like Clemson losing a couple more games, would it be the most incredible thing in the world in a pandemic? Not really. And Clemson barely beat Boston College. Who knows what's going to happen? You wouldn't expect it, but it's within the realm of possibility. And then let's say Florida beats Alabama in the SEC title game. Florida could put up 40 points against Alabama. Alabama's defense gave up 48 to Ole Miss. So that's certainly conceivable. You wouldn't expect it, but it's conceivable. So if several crazy things happen, UCF beating Cincinnati, for instance, later this year to remove the Bearcats from the college football playoff picture. If several dominoes do fall, it's still within the realm of possibility. But, one thing we all agreed on in covering the Pac-12 was that if there was going to be a playoff team at 7-0, it had to be a team that beat a strong 6-0 opponent in the Pac-12 championship game. First off, is USC going to get to 6-0? I would doubt it. The Trojans are probably going to slip on a banana peel at some point. But the second thing is that even if USC does go 6-0, Trojans might not look that great doing it. Because who else is going to be especially strong in the Pac-12 South? And USC's crossover game is against Washington State. So USC could be 6-0 and still not have proven anything. So the fact that USC wasn't very impressive against one of the better opponents on its schedule, that right there is going to undercut the Pac-12's playoff argument if we're talking about 7-0 USC or 7-0 Oregon.
One more before I let you go, Matt. Because it's 2020, it's a weird year. We're in the middle of a pandemic. It seems like the impossible or the very unexpected could happen. I'm curious thoughts on like a BYU or a Cincinnati or some of those teams that have been historically ignored by the college football playoff selection committee. If they have a chance because of that kind of wonkiness, if an Oregon team does lose, or is there a chance that this BYU team or this Cincinnati team or even other potentially unexpected teams could sneak in this year? Yeah,
so there's a chance. That's really similar to the last question. I hate to give a standard answer, but it really is the case that they're in the mix.
Yeah.
They are in the mix. They are in the conversation. We can acknowledge that, but they need several dominoes to fall in front of them. And BYU and Cincinnati were really hurt by Notre Dame beating Clemson, because that opens the door for Notre Dame and Clemson to give the ACC two teams. If Clemson wins the rematch with Trevor Lawrence, you have Notre Dame over here with the win over Clemson in a classic game, NBC. Everyone was glued to it, wanting to get to Dave Chappelle on Saturday Night Live. And then you can have in December Trevor Lawrence riding to the rescue, winning the rematch. So that bodes well for both Notre Dame and Clemson. Notre Dame has the resume win. Clemson loses just once, got revenge, conference champion. It's all lining up for the ACC to have two teams. So BYU and Cincinnati, so again, they're going to need Florida to beat Alabama in the SEC championship game, and preferably after Florida stubs its toe a second time. Right. I mean, Florida would still win the East and play Alabama because it has the head-to-head over Georgia. Mm-hmm. So Florida losing to Arkansas this Saturday, for instance, then beating Alabama in the SEC title game, Notre Dame or Clemson slipping up once more before they might play in the ACC championship game. Those kinds of things are going to need to happen for BYU and Cincinnati to get in. But if those things do happen, doors open.
Matt, thank you so much for taking the time on a Monday evening to jump on episode 1 of the show. I sincerely appreciate your expertise on the Pac-12 and hope that we can have conversations about this again going forward.
Andy, thanks for having me on, and congratulations. All success to you with this show. I know you're going to do great.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.